Hello Facebook, it's Reid and I from readaboutsex.com with our special guest star today.
Allison Moon of girlsex101.com.
Yes. I even put girlsex101 in the description.
Nice.
And I think it linked to the page.
Sweet.
Happy weekend, everyone. The question today, Allison and I have some guests staying at our place. They are lovers of mine. And we had this geeky, brain sexy conversation the other day, and we got to talking about something which I want to talk about with Allison and get your insight on. But the basic question, which I put in the description today, and as you say hi, tell us where you are today. Where are you listening or watching from? And also, what do you think about our question, which is, in polyamory, we're polyamorous, by the way, if you didn't know. In polyamory, when is it your responsibility? When is your partner's sex life your responsibility? That was the question I said.
That's a pretty good question.
That's a pretty good question. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I feel like it's a little bit of a trick question.
Aha! Trick
Because
questions.
regardless of your relationship orientation, relationship structure, your partner's sexuality is never your responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Boy, it's really noisy around here today. There's all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah, so let's get the grumbly gummies.
Yeah. And now you're checking your Pokemon.
I'm just making sure.
Yeah, it's okay. No worries.
Okay.
Check out Pokemon.
So yeah, trick question because you're never responsible for another person's sexuality, even if they're your monogamous spouse. We're always responsible for our own.
Huh?
So that's why it's a trick question. Mm-hmm. But in terms of polyamory, what stimulated this specific question is because non-monogamous people have the rights in a relationship to have sex with other people. That's essentially part of non-monogamy of all different kinds, polyamory being a subset. We do have the right to go sow wild oats, sniff around, whatever we want to call it.
Sniff around.
And when does, I don't know how to describe it. Basically to kind of drill down to the context of this question.
Yeah.
Reid and I, oh my God.
Sorry, it's so noisy today. It's like a Sunday.
Sunday afternoon. Okay, so Reid and I have very different sexual self-expressions, as anyone would in a relationship.
Because people are different.
Because people are different. Go figure. Reid likes
all the noises.
I want to move to the country so goddamn bad. This is driving me insane.
Sorry.
I'm going insane.
Slowly.
Not so slowly.
This is when Allison left me on a Facebook Live.
Okay, anyway, pulling back together. You talk for a second.
Okay. So here's my idea. My analogy is if you think about food, and if you're hungry, is it your partner's responsibility to feed you? Now this is going to be a problematic answer in that there are a lot of other factors going on here, but if we simplify it to answer the question, what can you do in your relationships, if you're in multiple relationships, to get your needs met sexually, sensually, intimacy-wise? And if you think about food, it's not, how do you empower each other to be able to cook the meals that you want and get your needs met for food in a way where it just really works for you. You and I kind of fend for ourselves for lunch time and breakfasty things, but we will often cook dinner together, or one of us will cook and then the other one does the dishes. And
in our relationship, there's this agreement that for dinner time, we'll check in with each other about what we want, what our needs are, if one of us is really hungry and one of us isn't, either trying to find a middle ground or just deciding to just do dinner on our own. There's a lot of wiggle room, but generally speaking, there's kind of this unspoken agreement that we always check in with each other about dinner.
Yeah, but you don't feel betrayed if you come home from running errands and I've already eaten lunch.
No, not at all.
Or if you were out late, doing whatever you're doing, and you came home and you're like, I'm hungry, I'm gonna fix some dinner. And I was like, well, I had an early dinner because I needed to eat. Hello, everyone. You wouldn't, it might be not the norm, but you wouldn't be like devastated that I didn't have dinner with you.
No. So in terms of sex, I think and again, the way our society treats sex is so bizarre anyway, that there's this notion that especially when you look at a monogamous paradigm, that your sexual needs must always be met by your spouse. And if they don't meet your needs, then they're doing something wrong. And vice versa, that if you aren't in the mood and they are, or they're that there's something wrong. There's something broken in the relationship. One of the most common questions as sex educators get is the whole question of mismatched libido. Because mismatched libido in monogamy generally means that one person is not getting their needs met in the relationship sexually. And that can cause a lot of strife. Even regardless of whether you're the one with the higher libido or the one with the lower libido, there's always going to be this tension. If you can't seek out getting your needs met from other people, how do you negotiate that in monogamy?
I think what's interesting too is just kind of the idea of, and again, like we're already having a very big conversation because we're actually talking about things that in a lot of other. Do you want to sit here because it might be quieter? That we're talking about stuff that for some people in some relationships would be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe we're having this really big conversation about libido and sexual desires and what kind of sex that we want to have. And so I just also want to recognize that there's a certain kind of relationship literacy or sexual literacy where you have the courage and you are in a situation where you can be open and honest and have conversations that might have been really difficult for my mom and dad to have because one, were lacking the communication tools and the emotional tools, but two, they also were in a relationship, societally speaking, where these things weren't even a possibility or things weren't even, couldn't even be brought up because culturally speaking, this was an understood situation and you just weren't going to deviate from, climbing out of the box of what society was telling you was possible. Yeah. So I just want to preface this, that this conversation, the ability to even have it, means that you're living with tools and contexts that go against the grain of what most people would consider like a standard relationship. And then out of that, now we can have a conversation because we're having an open relationship about like, well, so how do we, like, what are your needs? And then how can I support you or help support you in getting those needs met? And then I can also, reserve the right to chime in about the things that I'm a yes to or a not, or a no to, or kind of I don't know what I am a yes to yet. And I just want to kind of like put that as the context for this conversation so that it doesn't sound really flippant, that we're just like, well, whatever, like, go cook dinner yourself when it comes to getting your sexual needs met.
Well, I mean, the ability to have that conversation, like you said, it is incredibly high level. I know so many couples where there's just so much shame and stigma attached to sexuality and desire that if you don't bring your A game every time, every moment in your marriage or partnership, that you feel like you're doing a bad job. That's very common in relationships where one person's just not that into sex, period, or is dealing with trauma or is dealing with pain, and the other person just has of average sex drive. So it becomes a shameful aspect for the person with the lower sex drive or somewhere on the asexuality spectrum, because they feel like they're doing a bad job, because in relationships you're supposed to have sex, and you're supposed to be desirous of your partner all the time. And then of course on the flip side, if there's somebody who has a really high appetite for sex or is kinky or is interested in exploring different kinds of sexuality, again, our society tends to shame them for being perverts, essentially. And so if you are in a relationship with somebody who has a normal sex drive, average interest in sex, and generally vanilla, not kinky, and you're partnered to somebody who has, more, I don't know, adventuresome interests, it's usually the person with the adventuresome interests who's most shamed in our society because it means they're deviant. So there's that on that too. So you can't really win in these situations. The best thing you can do is have the damn conversation and be in a relationship with people who are healthy enough and honest enough that they can have that conversation without it having to mean things. Again, like Reid and I can talk about the fact that he has a lot of sex with a lot of different people, and I'm not particularly interested in having threesomes with people he brings home. And if luckily we have the ability to have that conversation, if we didn't, we would have been dead in the water a long time ago. We have to be able to communicate that stuff, and even when I feel ashamed of that thing, even when you think you're being a awesome, wonderful lover by bringing me this hot chick to bang.
But I don't do that anymore.
But for a long time you did.
Well, for a long time I was like, hey, here's somebody I really like. Do you want to play with us?
Right.
It was more inviting you to jam if we were musicians, and it was totally fine for you to be like, no, I'm not feeling musical today.
But it took me a long time to have the words for, I'm not feeling particularly musical today, but I don't like to jam with new people, period. And like during the beginning of our relationship, we were both pretty slutty, and so we both had a pretty good match, and group sex was part of our life very commonly. And as I've gotten older, it's just not that interesting to me anymore. I don't want to have sex with just anybody for funsies. It's actually less fun than having a good conversation with that person, or cooking a meal for everybody. I'm just not that into it anymore. And as a woman, and as a queer person, and as somebody partnered to a slut, it took me a really long time to have the words to describe my changing interests without being ashamed. Because part of me felt like, well, if I'm not slutty anymore, Reid's going to leave me, or I'm not really poly, or I'm not really a good match for you. And it's
not true.
But again, like we were throwing orgies, and I was in the bathtub having wonderful conversations with people, but not interested in touching their genitals. And people thought there was something wrong with me for a while, because why the hell would I be throwing an orgy if I don't want to fuck everybody? And it was an act of bravery, I think, for me to be out about not being a slut in a world full of sluts. And so I'm sharing that because I want to keep on impressing the notion that there's nothing wrong and you're not broken if your desires change over time.
Yep. And
if you decide you have different tastes that aren't accommodated by your certain arrangement, you need to have this conversation, especially as human beings. Our hormones change over our lives, our tastes change over our lives, and our notion of what feels good changes. And I think we need to give ourselves permission to allow those changes to happen. Because if we don't, if I thought I still had to have the sexuality I did when I was 25 and I met you, like I would be doing a lot of things I didn't want to really do just because I felt like I had to keep some sort of status quo, which isn't healthy, and that keeps a relationship from deepening and evolving into what it's going to be. I don't want to be the same person that I was when I was 25 when I'm 50 with you. I don't want you to be the same person you were when you were 40 with me. I think that that's the beautiful thing about long-term relationships, and just long-term relationships with your own sexual self.
My phone keeps telling me that it's about to cut out, and rather than be embarrassed and just end this prematurely, I made a premature joke, we're going to say goodbye now.
Yeah, sorry for all the noise.
Yeah, it was really noisy today, so but we have no control over that. I hope this was useful, and did you get any Pokemons?
Yeah, like
4 Pokemons.
It's a good spot.
And time spent with you today. So we'll leave some links if you go to readaboutsex.com/convo, CONVO, for my difficult conversation formula, which might help there.
And girlsex101.com, I actually still have that poll up about hooking up. So if you have casual sex, if you used to have casual sex and stopped, or are looking to try having casual sex, go to girlsex101.com, and the most recent blog post is a link to a survey. I would love for you to answer some survey questions so I can include them in my next book to make my book better and more inclusive.
Okay, we're gonna leave you now. Hit some emoticons, and we're gonna hit some Pokemon. Bye.
Bye.